Bluetongue in India. In South India, we see Bluetongue outbreaks in almost every year. So if you look at the sheep population of our country, it is about 7.26 million in 2019, which means we are the third in the sheep production in the world. Another thing is because these sheep are raised by socially underprivileged section of the society. They are poor people actually. And for them, sheep is an important commodity for their livelihood, and their economy depends on the healthy stock. And Bluetongue is a disease where actually the mortality can go up, generally seen about 30%, but it may go up to 90%. These are some of the photographs which we have taken during one of my field visits. And the first on the left-hand side at the top. During the 2019, there were a lot of sheep deaths, and they were bringing dead sheep in gunny bags. And on the right-hand side is when I visited a farmer's house. Actually, I saw 7 of his sheep died on that day. If you look at those photographs, you can see how important a Bluetongue is for them actually. Tyler was the first person to say that it is a virus closely associated with the blood. And then Mason later propagated the virus in embryonated eggs. And Howell 1960s, actually he was the first person to say that there are multiple serotypes of the virus, and we described our first dolo. And later again, the same person added another 4 serotypes. When we were reading, we heard about there are existence of about 24 serotypes, and now unofficially there are 36 serotypes of Bluetongue virus. And the Bluetongue is a culicoid-borne virus, and it affects the sheep, cattle, goats, camelids, and other wild ungulates. Though it affects many of these animals, sheep is the major animal that is affected by Bluetongue world over. Transmitted by culicoides vector, we many a times we call them nosy arms actually. So these transmit the disease both from the domestic to wild and vice versa, from wild to domestic. If you look at the culicoides as the major vector, and the vector-borne, it is generally called as vector-borne disease, but Bluetongue can also be transmitted by the direct contact, like the BTV serotype 26. It simply doesn't need a culicoides bite for its transmission. And there are reports of Bluetongue getting transmitted by oral route also. And there are mechanical routes, because some of the vectors which can also transmit Bluetongue mechanically, then through the needles, and then transplacental transmission from mother to child, and then venereal transmission. So all these kind of transmissions are there, but basically it is considered to be a disease, vector-borne disease. And within the vector also, the incubation period varies from 4 to 20 days depending on the temperature. And the intrinsic incubation period that affects the host, where actually it varies from 2 to 7 days. And the vector culicoides, and they are very small in size. If you are walking or passing by the dung, which is laid some 2 or 3 days back, you will see a swarm of insects just moving out. Those are all actually culicoides. There are about more than 1,400 species of these culicoides, and 70 species have been recorded in our country, and more than about 20 species are known to transmit Bluetongue. Officially, there are 29 known BTV serotypes, and these serotypes can be grouped serologically into 10 groups. Here in this particular figure, the thicker lines indicate the stronger relationship. The numbers in the circle indicate the serotypes, and the thinner lines which are connecting these circles show the weak antigenic relationship. The dotted lines actually are very weak relationship among these serotypes. Primary replication of BTV occurs in the peripheral lymph nodes, and then there will be a blood cell associated viremia. Then it gets deposited. That's this virus disseminations occur to different organs of the body, and the heart, liver, lungs, uterus, and spleen. These are some of the major organs where actually you see the virus replication. The virus replicates in the vascular endothelial cells. As a result, there will be damage to the endothelial cells, and as a result, there will be increased permeability of the fluid to the extra space, and there will be thrombosis and intravascular coagulation. and edema. There will be hemorrhages in many different organs, and cyanosis of the tongue is one of the reasons. Secondary bacterial infections as a result of the primary infection can also be seen. So generally in an Bluetongue infected sheep, you will see a high fever and hyperemia of the mucous membrane, particularly the muzzle in the area around nares, and there will be moistening, and the fever initially what you see is the sheep is increased breathing and as well as tachycardia, and the animal is listless, tired, and standing in one place. And in some of the severely affected sheep, you will see swelling of the head, face, and earlobes, somewhere near humpy. We saw this animal, and I think when we saw it, we were amazed to see it actually. And the head was so much swollen, it looked like as if there is a honeybee attack. And that is a kind of swelling we generally sometimes you'll see in Bluetongue. And many people have say that in Bluetongue you'll see a monkey face of the affected animals, obviously due to swelling. So you'll see kind of pictures. Initially, the nasal discharge is more or less serous along with blood, and later it gets mucus and then mucopurula. And you will see submandibular edema, particularly in those sheep infested with heavy parasitic infestation. And even in Bluetongue also, you will see submandibular edema. Bloody muscles and nares, actually, because it is a hemorrhagic disease, obviously there will be blank blood coming out of the nares along mixed with mucus, and later it gets dried up as seen in these photographs. And sometimes what you see is because the animal is so reluctant to feed, and it will be just keeping its head so low that the mud mixed things will also get into the muzzle, and you will see a picture something similar to this. And you'll see salivation as a result of ulceration of the gums and mucosal membranes of the oral cavity. The erosions, what you are seeing is slightly different from the erosions you'll see it in other diseases. And as I said, salivation is a result of the lesions in the oral cavity, and they look like this. I mean, there will be variation generally. I mean, some may be having very severe salivation depending on the level of lesions they have in the oral cavity. In some animals, you'll see regurgitation of the curd mixed with saliva, and this happens due to the necrosis of the skeletal muscles of the esophagus. And when the animals trying to regurgitate, curd comes out, and then it goes into the lungs, and the animal invariably dies in such situation. Shepherds generally know about this, and the moment they see these kind of symptoms, they just sell it off. And you will also see in some animals the bleeding at the mucocutaneous junction, particularly the commissures of the lips and the nares. And these may sometimes, this attracts the domestic flies, and the area may become like a secondary wound. Then Bluetongue we call, but actually the cyanotic tongue and swollen tongue is a rare phenomena in the field. We generally don't see quite often in this kind of symptoms. In some cases where there are severe Bluetongue cases, you may see 1 or 2 animals having this kind of clinical signs. Clinical signs vary. In some animals, you may see the total protrusion of the tongue. In some animals, slight protrusion. And this one is just as if the tongue is slightly moved out. So you will also see wry neck and torticollis. This is again due to the necrosis of the skeletal muscles of the neck. The sheep will be off it, and this again, this clinical sign also varies with the severity of the infection. And lameness, because in Bluetongue, what we see is the Bluetongue season many times coincides with the foot rot in particularly the southern states. And it is very, very difficult sometimes to differentiate the limping due to Bluetongue as well as due to Bluetongue. And you can see some of those animals. Particularly, these are all very young animals affected with Bluetongue, and they never went out, and you can see the area is so dry. Even then, even dry, the animals are limping. So naturally, when you see that, we read a lot about the clinical signs in the textbook. Not necessary that you will see all the clinical signs in a single animal. I mean, if you really want to check whether it is a particular disease, it is always better to see and examine a flock. In a flock, you will find invariably some of the at least some of the clinical signs explained in the textbooks. Last year, we have seen we have examined about 300 animals. From that, whatever the clinical signs, what we have seen, I just made a pie chart, and what you can see is the moistness of nails is about 7% of the animals. Swelling of face and eyelids in about 14% of the animals. Nasal discharge was seen in 27%, and that too mixed with the blood was about only 9%, and mucopurulent discharge was slightly lesser, and the ulcer in the mouth, torticollis was less, whereas lameness was more this year because there was heavy rains and there was a lot of foot rot cases associated with it. So particularly assigning this lameness to Bluetongue was difficult. So this is what we see. And naturally this particular, the number of animals having these clinical signs also varies depending on the season. And Bluetongue has to be differentiated with diseases like PPR. What I can say is in PPR, the mucus discharge, or the discharge from the nostril as well as from the is very, very thick and ropey kind of thing. And many a times you'll see the crusts formed around the nostrils and the muscles. And there will be severe lacrimation. And again, you'll see the crusting around the eyelids. And when you open the mouth, there will be necrotic foci. It's certainly not the kind of erosions you see in Bluetongue. You can see on the fingers of that person who was holding this, opening the mouth, there are necrotic debris coming out of the oral cavity of the sheep to his, on his finger, and then there will be diarrhea. So these are the major features of PPR, and so I think if you look at closely, you'll be able to differentiate PPR from Bluetongue. It's a larger picture of the same thing, and I can hope you can appreciate that. And then FMD. In FMD, in sheep is mostly restricted to the limbs actually. You will see lesser oral regions in FMD compared to Bluetongue, and more lesions are in the interdigital space, and lameness is a common feature of FMD in sheep. And ours probably much easier to differentiate. And foot rot, of course, you need to go and examine the foot and see that it is foot rot. And postmortem findings generally, because Bluetongue is a hemorrhagic disease, there will be damages to the vascular structure, and you invariably will see hemorrhages in many organs. There will be edema, thrombosis, and necrosis of the cardiac and skeletal muscles if you examine it microscopically. As I said, there will be hemorrhages, erosions, and hyperemia in the oral lesions. And on the poststomachs, particularly on the papillae of the ruminal pillars, reticular folds, esophageal groove, and you'll see petechia and erosions. And if you look at the lungs, you may see heavy edematous, congested, hemorrhagic, not collapsed kind of lung. Areas of consolidation and empysemas also can see in apical and diaphragmatic lobes. And in some animals, you may also see fibrotic changes and consolidation of unventilated area. And in some animals, particularly died of peracute disease, where actually you see a lot of fluid accumulation in the thoracic cavity, peritoneum, hemorrhages in the internal organs. Hemorrhages or the petechia at the base of the pulmonary artery is considered to be pathognomonic for Bluetongue, but it is difficult to find out unless until you stretch other structures of the heart and the lung and then hold it up against the light. You'll be able to see it, and you can see that on the left, the photograph on the right hand side. And in the small intestines, there will be hyperemia to severe lesions, hemorrhagic lesions, which may even extend up to the large intestine. In the muscles, you'll see hemorrhages. Spleen may be slightly enlarged. Subscapular hemorrhages may also be present. So lymph nodes are generally swollen and edematous. So as far as the epidemiology is concerned, Bluetongue is a seasonal disease in our country. But Bluetongue season varies depending on which part you are in. Like a state like Jammu and Kashmir, I mean, now in the Union Territory, So you will see the Bluetongue in summer, actually in April months, March, April, or early part of May, you may see Bluetongue. Northern India, soon after the rains, particularly during August, end of July and August. And then in southern India, it starts from summer, mainly from July end. But most of the outbreaks, what we see in South India is in the months of September, October, November, and December. And in the southern states also, this varies. Particularly, we see what we have seen is the outbreaks generally seen much earlier in states of Telangana and Andhra, and then in Karnataka, and lastly in Tamil Nadu. If you look at the seasonal map or the rain map, you'll be able to understand a few things actually. So from this, what we can say is in southern India, the monsoon starts early. Time for the withdrawal is late. Whereas in northern India, starts slightly later and withdraws also quickly. The window for the culicoides to multiply and produce the disease is very short in the northern region compared to the southern region. Because in the northern region, winter starts by October to November. Whereas in South India, that is an ideal climate. So that is the reason probably because of the sheep concentration as well as the longer time window which you see in southern India, we see a large number of Bluetongue cases. And disease is cyclical. If you look at this time series graph, there are many peaks and the falls. Every season, you will not see a large number of outbreaks. What we can say is you will see larger outbreaks in every third year or the second or third year. Now, this is mainly due to the growth of the susceptible population in terms of turnover of the younger animals. You will see a large prevalence of larger number of serotypes prevalent in southern states, whereas the serotypes are lesser in the northern states. As I said, the outbreak season is short, and the scope for virus circulation is also small in the sense. Many different serotypes are seen in southern India. And in our country, we have made isolations of about 14 serotypes in cell culture, whereas from serologically, we have identified the prevalence of about 21 serotypes. And if you look at the dynamics, the serotypes are also, predominance in the serotypes in the season is also varies. Like a particular, the lines indicate different serotypes, the colored lines. Like if you look at the yellow line in which shows about BTV serotype 1. Here what you can see is it was predominant during 2014, 15, and 15, 16 season, and later serotype 2 and 16 took over. So these kind of overtaking and happens in the field, and this may also add up to the Bluetongue outbreak season. Not only that, actually, in a single flock may be infected with multiple serotypes. Not necessary that it is a single serotype affecting the flock. So in a given locality, you will see multiple flocks and multiple serotypes prevalent. This is an example of Sathyazerograzing, what we have found. And where do you see clinically visible outbreaks in our country? Because just wherever the sheep are there, obviously you will see the outbreaks, the southern India and parts of Maharashtra, Gujarat, Rajasthan, and parts of Haryana, and then parts of Jammu Kashmir. And this is one of the serological prevalence. We wanted to see how exactly the prevalence in goats actually. So this indicates that the culicoides vectors are available and present in many parts of our country. And the virus is also prevalent in almost throughout the country. But prevalence is more in the southwestern region of our country, which is definitely in conformity with the sheep population. And in goats also, though the goats are prevalent, in the disease transmission is less so, and major probably the circulation of the virus occurs in this region. And in a season, if you examine, not all the age group is predominantly infected. It is the age group between 6 to 24 months that is mostly affected, but other age group you see a lesser number of animals affected. And there is a question about whether all the sheep breeds are really susceptible to Bluetongue. In our country, we don't have information about that. And I mean, to my knowledge, I have not come across with any sheep variation. I mean, from the gross variation in clinical signs or anything. Then treatment, prevention, and control. In the disease-free countries, they practice this, whereas in our countries, we don't practice it. Actually, in the infected premises, they make a control zone that falls within 20 kilometers, where all the infected premises are located. And in this zone, everything is restricted. Not even the movement between the infected premises also is not permitted. Whereas in the protection zone, limited permission is given for the movement, but they will not be exchanging any material, anything from the protected zone to control zone. And in surveillance zone, of course, it is mainly for the surveillance purpose, but it is also fall within the restricted zone. And as far as the vaccine is concerned, now we have a pentavalent vaccine available, which incorporates serotypes, 5 serotypes, 1, 2, 10, 16, and 23. The technology has been transferred to 3 companies. All of them are located in Hyderabad. One is the BioVet, of course, the factory is in Karnataka, and the Indian Immunologicals, and another one is Samhita Biotech. People use corticosteroids, they say sometimes they are effective. Of course, in the initial stages when there is a cytokine storm, like what we see in COVID also. So in those conditions, you can use it, I think. But I've seen people using many different kind of things. Homeopathy, I've seen some of these bottles during the field visits. They say it helps. And there are ethno-veterinary medicines, banana soap, ginger oil. So the only thing is all these things will help to alleviate problems and probably help them to graze. Then shepherds, I've seen shepherds using these kind of mosquito nets. They are definitely not useful actually, because culicoids are so small that they come inside these nets. But maybe to certain extent, maybe 10% level, they may reduce their entry, but they are not totally preventive. And use of pyrethroid insecticides, and then the neem burning and application of neem oil are also seen. But they are not, particularly the application of neem oils, neem burning leaves are not very effective. And issues to be addressed for Bluetongue, because whenever we go for an investigation, we see sheep flocking around such kind of areas, which are very good place for culicoid breeding. So we should educate farmers about this, and we should see that they keep their flock in dry area, which is far from these kind of areas. And another thing what I've seen is the vaccination is not practiced as a preventive measure many times. The dots here indicates the number of locations or have visited. And in most of these locations, what I found is the animals are not vaccinated. And somehow if they have vaccinated also, it was just a month back, and no booster dose was given, because IL advocates a booster dose in newly vaccinated animals, and that is not practiced. Serotypes prevalent present in current pentavalent vaccines are not relevant in field. Say for example, BTV10, which is shown in red color box. We are not seeing BTV10 cases in the field very often, and it's very less. And along with that, BTV10 is a mild strain. It is more of an American vaccine strain. So we are recommending it to be replaced with the upcoming serotypes, particularly 12, 4, and 24, which are shown in arrow. This is the figure data of 3 states: Andhra, the word Andhra, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. So what you can see is BTV1 and 2 are most predominant serotypes in our states also, and in the entire country, I would say BTV1 and 2 are the most predominant serotypes, and 16 is also another predominant serotypes. Whereas 23, the cases of involvement of this 23 is is limited, and we may think of replacing it also in the future.